Week 2 of the Guildford Junior Chess Club project was equally successful as the first week, with over 30 kids turning up and everybody having a good time. The focus this week was on actually letting the kids play chess rather than give any formal coaching. I think it's very important at an early stage of development to just let the kids play, to not overcoach them or overload their mind with concepts, because that can turn them off. I mean, a lot of the time, kids just want to actually play the game. I had a nice group, an advanced group, and I ran a selected openings tournament for them, trying to expose them to all different types of opening. And kids seemed to enjoy that. One of the openings featured was the Sicilian Dragon, which I actually think is a pretty good opening for young players to learn. As you get stronger, of course, there's an awful lot of theory attached to this sharp opening. But at an early stage, the Dragon can teach a young player a whole variety of attacking plans, both for white and for black, and introduce them to the world of chess tactics, because a lot of the variations in the Dragon are supremely tactical. Well, I've got a couple of games for you to illustrate just how interesting the Dragon can be. And my main game is between Juan Diego Parges and Daniel Miles Palau. And the black player is graded 2592, which is Grandmaster level, of course. And I mean, that could be an online rating, which are often overinflated, but nevertheless, he's obviously a very strong player. And so let's just see the Dragon in action. Well, white opened with e4. Black plays c5. This is the Sicilian Defense, and it's one of black's best responses to e4. And the main rationale behind it at this early stage is that it dissuades white from playing d4. Well, white normally plays that anyway. It's called the open Sicilian. But if he does do it, he's got to be aware that black's going to take the pawn quite quickly and stop white from forming two pawns in the centre. So knight f3 was played, and now black played knight c6. The normal Dragon starts with the move d6 here. This could lead to all manner of different systems. In actual fact, in this game, after d4 takes g6, it leads to what we call the accelerated Dragon, which is actually going to transpose back into the main line Dragon in a few moves' time. Let's not concern ourselves with these transpositions at this stage of the game, because it could result in a 2-hour video. So white plays knight c3, black plays bishop g7, which attacks the knight, and white defends the knight. Very important point for kids here. A lot of kids will just snatch at that knight on c6. B takes c6. If it can be taken, it must be taken. But when you take something on the chessboard, when you exchange pieces, you've got to ask yourself, what am I getting for this exchange? How is that going to help my position? And in this case, frankly, that exchange has only helped black, because black has now got additional control of the centre. White's lost his strongly placed knight in the middle, and the diagonal was open for the bishop on g7. So it seems to me that only black has benefited from that transaction. Hence, a much better move by white, bishop e3 in the game. And black played knight f6. Well, white played bishop c4. You can do other things. Black castled. Another nice thing about the Dragon is you get to castle quite quickly, or you should do. Bishop to b3, d6, and now we get direct transposition back into an opening variation called the Yugoslav Attack, which, as any dyed-in-the-wool Dragon player knows, is the acid test of this opening. White is ploughing forward with his h-pawn. He's going to play h5. He doesn't care at all about sacrificing that pawn. All he wants to do is to open up the black king and give checkmate. A famous player, Bobby Fischer, said that dismantling the Dragon was quite easy. It was just a question of sack, which is sacrifice, and then checkmate. Well, we're going to see that it's actually not so easy for white, but black really has to know what he's doing. Queen a5 was played, pinning that knight on c3. White played queen to d2, unpinning and setting up the idea of bishop h6 at the right moment, trying to get rid of one of the major defenders of black's king. Black brought his rook across, and the pawn went on to h5. As I say, white's not bothered about sacrificing that pawn. Black took it, very bold. White castled on the queen side, and now the knight came to e5, intending to put the knight on c4, which would actually probably force white into giving up the light squared bishop. White played g4. I should say at this point that this is all well-known theory. This is unimportant to the young player. You know, they just want to see the ideas. But if you're an advanced dragon player, you really have to know what you're doing when you go into this stuff, because white is whipping up an incredibly strong attack here with the idea of bishop h6. Well, now comes a very interesting dragon idea with black removing the bishop, letting the queen in, but now responding with rook takes c3. A thematic exchange sacrifice in a position like this. White takes back, black comes in with his queen. Now, let's list the advantages of this sacrifice, because actually it can occur in a lot of different Sicilian positions, particularly when black's in a position to take the e-pawn after taking on c3. Of course, he's not here. This is a special case. But the advantages are clear. Number one, black has smashed up the white king position. Number two, black has removed one of white's major attacking pieces. I mean, I think if I just drop back here, if it was white to move and white was able to play knight d5 here, I think he would actually win the game, because he would get rid of this defender of h7. It's very important for black that knight is defending h7 here, or is able to block the attack in the event of g5, knight h5. If black loses that knight on f6, then he's going to lose the game. So if it was white's move in this position, white would certainly play knight d5. This is why it's imperative to get rid of that knight and take the move knight d5 away. And finally, black's got the easy plan here of just pushing up his queenside pawns, which would embarrass that bishop on b3. Not only that, the rook can come to c8, as it does quite quickly. The knight can maybe come into c4. And the white attack is, in general, much more difficult to manage with that knight on c3 off the board. Now, in order to show you how important that knight is, let's go all the way back to the start. I'm going to show you a different game where white's attack crashed through. We're going to get the same type of position coming up. But in this particular game, instead of bishop c4, white castled on the queen side, which is another one of the main lines here. And this game, Evans-Zuckerman, New York, 1966, is often held up as a model example of what white is aiming for in the Yugoslav attack. Well, black took on d4. I mean, you can argue all night and all day about whether he should do that, but it's one of the main lines. White put his king on b1, and now black just moved all the pieces over to the queen side to start the attack. And white got on with the move h5. So here we have the same type of thing as before. Zuckerman boldly took the pawn. White took on g7. Black took back with the king. g4, knight f6. In came the queen. King to g8. And now it's a question of how white finishes off this attack. I think that's the best way to describe it. Now, it's important for black that he's covering the d5 square here. There's no knight d5 in the position. Not only would it allow black to take the knight, there's a pawn on c2 hanging, which would lead to checkmate for black in this current situation. But Evans has an excellent move up his sleeve here. He plays e5. And that's what we call a clearance sacrifice. It makes room for the knight to come to e4 at the right moment. Well, black's actually got to take that, because otherwise h7 is dropping if he moves the knight. So he takes it. And now another excellent move here, g5. Forcing the knight out to h5 to block the attack. And now bishop to d3. With two ideas. Number one, white has covered c2. Number two, white's threatening rook takes h5, opening up all the lines towards the black's king. And I'm not at all sure what black is going to do about this. Well, he pushed on. Rook takes h5, smashing through. G takes h5. And now this pesky knight comes into the game. And it's going to have a significant impact on this particular position. Queen f4. well, I suppose black at this point can't really do anything. I think white might be threatening the devastating knight f6 here, which opens up lines towards h7, and g7 is weak. The black king, with no defenders around it, can hardly survive. So black tries to defend with the queen, but white lands the crushing blow knight f6 anyway. The knight is a killer in this position. Black takes it. White comes into h7. King must go into the corner, a most uncomfortable situation. Bishop f5, discovered check. A beautiful move. King must go back, check, check again, and Zuckerman resigned. Because, of course, if he goes to e7, the only move, then white has a beautiful checkmate with the pawn. And we see now the point of this bishop on f5, because it interrupts the queen actually defending f6. So that really is normally held up as a model of what white is aiming for in the Yugoslav attack. Which brings us all the way back to our main game. And we rejoin the game with black having taken this pawn on c3. This is a completely different ball game, a completely different animal. And white's got to find a way through to the black king, because, well, black's attack is going to be pretty fast by just pushing those queenside pawns up. King to b1, a first concession by white. You don't want to waste time in a position like this. White would much rather have played an attacking move, but black's threats were too strong. He had to cover a1. For instance, if he pushes on here, then black just destroys white by giving a check. King comes up, we whip off the knight with check, and then we give a check with a bishop. White has had it. So king to b1 is probably necessary. This gives black the time to bring his rook into the game. It's flowing the attack. So white tries to just disrupt everything by chucking a knight on the bonfire. And this might work. This might work if black was forced to take back with a pawn, because then white takes back here with the g pawn, and suddenly it's black who has defending to do. Fortunately for black, he can take the knight with the bishop and then bring the knight in, threatening checkmate. And this is a most uncomfortable situation for white, because if he takes, the rook comes in, and as you can see, black's attack is crushing. Black's threatening the c-pawn, black's threatening checks. This is not a very nice position for white. But it's not nice either after queen to c1. A purely defensive move. This gave black the chance to start taking white pawns. He took on f3. White kept on trying to confuse matters. Black took it. Note that this knight is pinned, but actually that doesn't matter too much. It can be defended. The most important thing is he's blocking that bishop out of the game. Rook hf1 was answered by queen to c3, and rook d3 by queen to b4. White's trying his best to harass the black queen. He hits her again. She moves back. Rook fd1, king to g7, rook to h3, black played h5, and white either lost on time or resigned. It may seem slightly early to resign, but if you think about it, white's position is a complete wreck. Black has got no less than 4 pawns and a knight for a rook in this current situation. He's threatening to whip off another pawn with check because black's unpinned by putting his king on g7. And somewhere along the line, black is going to find the way to push those pawns and tie white down even further. So white had had enough, quite enough, against a player of black's caliber. I mean, it's quite polite at grandmaster level or a high level just to resign games. You don't drag the game on indefinitely. That's just bad manners. It's fair to say that black is totally winning in this position. So there we are. You can learn a lot from games like this, and it does feature the Sicilian Dragon, as I say, an opening which young players could do much worse than learning and using in their own games.